order. Mr. Nutlin, would you lead us in a flag salute?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Sunshine Law Statement. All requirements of the Open Public Meetings Act have been met for this meeting of the Board of Education of the Borough of Oradell. Notice of this meeting was filed with the Record and Town News and all persons requesting such notice. Mr. Darian, would you read the mission statement?
The Oradell Public School District is dedicated to the ongoing pursuit of educational excellence through comprehensive, innovative curriculum and instruction. The district is committed to providing opportunities for social, emotional, and academic discovery to foster curiosity, courage, and character. Our goal is to prepare our students to become lifelong learners who are self-directed, resilient, productive, responsible citizens.
Thank you. Roll call.
On the roll, Mr. Del Greco.
Here.
Mr. Darian.
Here.
Mrs. Downey.
Here.
Mrs. Moran.
Here.
Mr. Nutlin.
Here.
Mrs. Walker.
Here.
Mr. Walsh will not be here. Mrs. Norian. Mrs. Nichols.
Here. Open to the public for agenda items only. Not seeing any at this time. I would like to invite our auditor, Mr. Jeff Bliss, to present the 23-24 audit report.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me here tonight to present the audit. Good. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me here tonight to present the audit for the year ended June 30th, 2024. Our main responsibility when completing the audit and after examining the books and records is to express an opinion on your financial statements, whether they are fairly stated, prepared in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, and whether there were any scope limitations in the audit. Our opinion was unmodified, which means a clean opinion, meaning the financial statements are fairly stated, they're prepared in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, and there were no scope limitations in performing the audit. We also are required to express an opinion on your compliance with major federal financial assistance. This opinion was also unmodified, meaning you complied in all material respects with the grant compliance requirements. Unmodified or clean opinions in a school district audit is an absolute must. And the district has achieved unmodified opinions again this year. We noted no material weaknesses in internal controls or no significant deficiencies in internal controls. Those are findings that rise to a very high level. We had no reportable findings with respect to government auditing standards or under the Single Audit Act, when we did have one general finding, which we'll discuss after I review fund balance. We did just have a meeting with finance and went into great detail on fund balance, so I will review it for the other board members. If you want to follow along, on page 75 of the cleared covered book is a summary of fund balance. Just overall, fund balance is broken down into many sections. There's restricted fund balance, which is money set aside by board resolution or state statute for specific purposes and must be used for those purposes. Then we have committed and assigned fund balances, which are set aside by either board action or by management. And then there's what's the unassigned fund balance, the used to be called surplus, free balance. The first item in restricted fund balance was capital reserve, $1,258,628, represents the capital reserve the board has, through resolutions, put monies aside to fund capital projects in the long-range facility plan. The $1,258,628 has not been earmarked for any specific project and is available to fund any future project in the long-range facility plan. We also had capital reserve designated for subsequent year expenditures, meaning we are utilizing those funds in the 24-25 budget, the current year you're in, to fund a project. That was $782,312. So those funds are earmarked for specific projects. If the funds don't get spent on those projects, any unexpended monies will go back to the $1,258,000. Capital reserve funds cannot be used for operating expenses. Can't use them for salaries, benefits, tuition costs, transportation costs. It's earmarked for capital projects in the long-range facility plan. You also, the board, over the years has put aside money in maintenance reserve. We had $493,157 at the end of the year. That has not been earmarked for maintenance projects. And in addition, we had maintenance reserve that we designated for subsequent year expenditures or we're utilizing in the 25-25 budget of $150,000. Again, if the $150,000 does not get utilized on the projects that were earmarked for, the difference, the balance, will go back into the $493,000. Maintenance reserve, like capital reserve, can only be used for required maintenance of school facility projects. Can't be used for capital projects, can't be used for operating expenses. The difference between a capital project and a maintenance project is capital projects add value to the capital assets and prolong its life. So in addition, a new roof, all new windows, where maintenance projects keep the facilities in their current working order. You replace one window, you replace one door. Basically, you fix the boiler fixtures, you put new fixtures on it. That's maintenance. A new boiler is capital. Again, it's put aside by board resolution and can only be used for those purposes. The district also has emergency reserve funds of $130,425, which it has not earmarked for any projects or any purposes. Emergency reserve funds can only be used by board resolution to fund unbudgeted health benefit costs that exceed 4%, or to use for a security project at the time you adopt the budget. To use it for any other purpose requires the county superintendent's approval to use it. Very difficult to get that approval. It's funds really set aside if there are no other funds to fund an expense. You also had $45,000 of emergency reserve funds that was designated for the subsequent year's expenditures, again, meaning you used it in the 24-25 budget. That $45,000 is being used for a security project. I think it's new cameras, but it's a security project. So those funds are earmarked for that. Again, if you don't spend the money on all that $45,000, it'll go back to $130,000, the $134,25 that has not been earmarked. We also had an unemployment compensation reserve of $25,717. Those are funds set aside to fund your unemployment compensation claims. The district, like many other governmental entities in New Jersey, funds its unemployment claims on a self-insured basis. So you pay dollar for dollar for claims. Our experience is this is a much cheaper way to pay your unemployment than to contribute to the state, and then they hold the money in their accounts. There's two sources of money: the employees' deductions and then the monies that you put in. The $25,717 is the district's contribution to that fund. Next two items: excess surplus. In New Jersey, Your unassigned surplus or unassigned fund balance can only be 2% of your budget, with certain adjustments that you could add to that. Any amount over that 2% that has not been transferred into any of the reserve accounts must be earmarked as excess surplus and must be used as a revenue source in the next budget that the district adopts. When we closed the books at June 30th of '24, and we did the transfers into the reserve that were approved by board resolution, the district ended up with $300,000 of excess surplus. Those funds, by statute, must be used as a revenue source in the '25-26 budget. Cannot be used for any other purpose. So they're earmarked. When you start the '25-26 budget, the minimum amount of fund balance you will anticipate is $300,000. Can't be used for any other purpose. That compares to excess surplus designated for subsequent expenditures of $357, $356. Those were the funds that were over 2% at June 30th of '23 that are being used in the '24-25 budget in accordance with the statute. They're funding expenses in the current year. Those funds, that $357,000, is no longer available to fund future expenses. It's July 1, it loses its distinction. It's funding expenses in the current budget. Next two items are committed and assigned year-end encumbrances. The first one, committed 622,564, represents open purchase orders for construction contracts where the board has awarded these contracts, but they have not been performed on. We don't owe anybody, we don't owe any contractor money. He has not completed the contract. As the contract is completed, we will receive an invoice for work completed. We will vouch that, and we will liquidate that purchase order, and those funds will be expensed. By this point in time of the year, those monies have probably all been spent and all those purchase orders liquidated. Those funds are not available going forward to fund future expenses. They're committed to those contracts. As those contracts get completed, we liquidate those funds. That compares to the year-end encumbrances under assigned fund balance. $44,150 represents the day-to-day type purchases, goods or supplies we've ordered. They have not been received by the district. We don't owe the vendor any money until those goods are received. At this point in time, again, those goods have all been received, those purchase orders liquidated, those vendors paid. Those funds are no longer available going forward to fund future expenses. That leaves you with the unassigned fund balance. Many years ago, they used to call it free balance. They used to call it free balance surplus. Unassigned fund balance of $662,260 represents the maximum 2% you're allowed to maintain, 2% of your budget, plus an additional $373,000 of state aid we received during the year that we didn't budget. So you're allowed to keep 2% in there, and you're allowed to add the unbudgeted state aid there. The important thing to note for the amount of the unbudgeted state aid is that the board during the year by resolution can appropriate that portion of unassigned fund balance, that $373,000, to the budget to fund any unbudgeted costs in the '24-25 budget. You cannot dip into the 2%. When you prepare your '25-26 budget, you have to use the $300,000 of excess surplus. You have no choice. If you need additional funds to draw off of, you draw off the $662,260. Overall fund balance increased about $128,000 from $4,700,000 to roughly $4,871,000. It's basically stable. It's very comparable to the last year. A significant amount of the funds are in the construction contract, so those funds are not available. But overall, the district is in very stable condition, very good condition, and should have continue maintaining those financial stability. With respect to recommendations, we had one recommendation in our management report, which is the smaller of the two reports. And on the last page, page 12, is just a summary on the school purchasing program. We had a recommendation regarding the school purchasing procedures. Just need to take greater care in making sure we comply with the local public contracts law. New Jersey is very restrictive with its purchasing laws. Purchases which exceed a certain amount, which is the bid threshold of $44,000, all those purchases must be approved by the board. We had an instance where one purchase was not. Certain non-biddable contracts for professional services must be advertised in the newspaper after you award the contract. That notice is to just say that we awarded a non-bid contract for professional service, who the professional is, the service provided, and the amount of the contract. You're not required to bid them, but you're required to provide that notice. And then we had certain purchases made through cooperative purchasing programs. Cooperative purchasing programs are other governmental entities that go out to bid for you, and you are allowed to piggyback off that bid. You're not required to bid. You're required to award those contracts if they exceed $44,000. But as part of the process, you have to verify that there is a contract in existence, and you need to get certain contract documentation from that co-op and verify that the contract is in existence, it has not expired, and that the goods and services and the prices that that vendor's charging you are in accordance with that contract award. This is not unique to Oradell. The cooperative purchasing programs are becoming more and more popular with government in general, and this seems to be an issue where people do forget to get that documentation and verify that you're getting charged the right amounts. That's the only recommendation we had. It's overall an excellent report from a financial standpoint as well as from a financial position standpoint. If there's any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Mr. Darian?
Yes, Mr. Bliss, you mentioned for co-ops that you have to get additional documentation in terms of the pricing and that the contract is in place. You're referring to the vendor, correct? So,
Yes, the vendor.
Yeah.
Not the, yeah.
Not the co-op.
Well, you have to get that from the co-op, because they're the ones who award the contract, and then you got to verify it to the vendor's invoices and the vendor's proposals, because the co-op awards the contract, and they have that documentation.
Okay, so you just have to make sure that what the vendor charges you is shown in the co-op as an agreed-upon service or product,
Yes.
and that the prices match.
Correct, exactly.
Okay.
You're not required to bid, you don't have to advertise anything, you just got to get the documentation.
Because some vendors may have other things that are not necessarily approved within the co-op.
Correct, there's sometimes the contract expired, and they say, oh, you could buy it under this contract, but it expires, and sometimes they charge different prices, and they don't give you the goods that were in the contract.
Okay.
Exactly right.
Is there a limit to when you use a co-op purchasing limit?
No.
Okay, so what if part of the majority of the items are in the co-op contract, but there's a few others from the vendor that are not, that you should split them, separate invoices? Would it be a separate project? Is it?
No, it's not a separate project. You would just have to make sure that the items that are not in the co-op do not exceed the bid threshold. And then if they exceed the quote threshold, you may have to get quotes.
Any questions? Mrs. Walker?
So more and more, we're using the co-ops for different items that we're purchasing. Why is that the case? Cheaper?
It's cheaper because you don't have to provide specs.
They do that for you?
They do the whole thing. You don't have to provide specs. You don't have to go out to advertise. You don't have to have the lawyer review the bids if it's like construction. So it is cheaper and it's much quicker because you have to do a bid, you have to go out, advertise. Usually takes a month, could take a month. The bids come back, you have to go through the bids. The attorney has to review them. And then you have up to 60 days to award that bid. With the co-ops, they have done that for you. And so if it's an approved cooperative vendor, you can just legitimately pick the phone up and tell the vendor, provide me a proposal of what it would cost to do this, and basically you're done. Except you got to compare what his proposal is to what the contract award information is.
So I guess depending on who the co-op is, the larger they are, the more benefits you receive, correct? I mean, somebody has to make money on these things.
Well, I'm sure I think you have to pay, and I will direct this to Mr. Iapelli. I believe you have to join the co-op. The board has to approve joining the co-op, and I'm sure there's some type of fee that you have to pay. No? So somehow they're getting paid. Usually they're like, it could be another Board of Education. There's the Education Services Commission to it. That's a good question. I don't know how they get paid. I know some of them, there is a fee to join.
We can use a co-op for things that are below the bid threshold also, right? You can use it for anything. So I think that when you say it's cheaper if it's over the bid threshold. But I think below the bid threshold, their prices are not cheaper. Because I think their prices are actually higher below.
I think it depends on what you're buying, what product. But listen, if you're over the quote threshold, you still kind of should.
If you're over the quote, yeah,
you
definitely.
I mean, no matter what you do, if you're
Yeah.
buying from a co-op, you still should check the prices with other
absolutely.
vendors.
Absolutely.
The thing is, you just don't have to go through the bid process.
Right. Any questions?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Darian?
Yes, in regards to our reserve accounts,
Yes.
for capital reserve, we currently have around 2.2 million, of which 782,000 is already allocated this year for projects, which leaves 1.3 or 1.4 million. What is a good number for a district like ours to have in our capital reserve?
This question always comes up. It's very difficult to say because it depends what projects you have in your long-range facility plan, how you prioritize those projects, and what I can tell you is this. Your long-range facility plan total is about 7.4 million.
Okay,
And you're basically allowed to maintain, at the minimum, 60% of that, which is 4.4 million, and at a maximum, 7.4 million. So, depending on when you plan to do those projects, really depends on how much you want to have in capital reserve. I think the most important thing for any Board of Education is that if you're going to put money into a capital reserve, you should be using it on the projects that you put it away for, not just keep stock. We have districts that have tens of millions of dollars in capital reserves, and they don't use them.
right.
So, but here, you could see you had about 2.1 million, you're using almost 800,000 of it. And the year before that, you used 940,000 of it. So, and in the end, what you're doing is you're saving the taxpayers from going out to referendum, debt costs and interest costs. You're using money that came from excess revenues and not spending the budget and putting it away for future use on capital items. And capital items, you don't have to budget for them every year, but operating costs you do. So, you know, they're what we call the non-recurring type.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I still have other questions. Our maintenance reserve, we're maxed out currently, and the emergency reserve, what is the max for that?
In your case, it would be 250,000,
Okay,
and you were at 175.
okay. Thanks.
You're welcome.
I have a question on the unemployment compensation reserve. I should have asked you this in our finance meeting. Just for procedure-wise, is that something you must have a reserve for, or can you pay it out of, you know, your operating budget?
You are not required to have a reserve.
Okay, and then, so there's no requirement as how you fund it? You don't have to fund it yearly, monthly with
No.
payroll? It's whenever we feel it's getting lower and we,
Yes. What you have to
Okay.
do is when the claim comes in, you have
Right.
to pay it.
okay.
So
I didn't know if there was a
first you-
legal requirement when you had to, okay.
But first, you draw down from the employees' deductions, and then you draw down from the district's contributions.
Okay, perfect. Mr. Nutland?
Yes, thank you for that report. It's very informative. I do have a question on, you mentioned that there was a reserve account that can only be used for projects that are for revenue.
Not sure.
There-
You must have,
It sounded like there was part of the bundles of money that can go, that,
yes. The excess surplus,
right,
300,000,
okay,
must be used as a revenue source in anticipation of fund balance in the next budget. So you have a budget, it has expenses, and then you have revenues. And one of the revenues, besides taxes and state aid, is how much fund balance you're going to use to balance that budget. The minimum you must use is that 300,000.
okay. Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Bliss.
Thank you.
We'll be talking to you the next few weeks during budget.
All right.
We
Good
appreciate
night,
your
everyone.
time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Also, I'd like to thank Mr. Iapelli for keeping us in such a strong financial position this year. We appreciate it. At this time, we will move to the superintendent's report.
Before I begin the district goal update, I wanted to provide you with some school highlights. Tomorrow is officially the 100th day of school, but if you look at our admin who are sitting in the audience today, they will tell you that last week felt 100 days long. Friday was the kickoff to the hoops season with Ms. Cummings and Dr. Roth leading the charge this year. Hoops is a longstanding OPS tradition, but every year we try to make it a little bit better. We have added some additional aspects to the program. This year we gave teams the opportunity to work collaboratively and negotiate to name themselves. We also asked staff to be present for the beginning of the first game. They created a tunnel for all teams to run through. We also had prior OPS students come back to volunteer. They served as refs, they served as photographers, and they even wore the Panther costume. It was really a great day and something that makes me proud to lead this community every year. Hoops isn't about winning. It's about supporting each other, and we really encourage kids who don't love basketball to find a way to help out as well. I was speaking to some students to try to get some more student photographers to help out. We are a little short on refs, so if any board members who have a basketball background want to volunteer, we will definitely take you up on that offer, including any children of board members who might be living on the second floor of their home and have a basketball background as well. Last week, and again this week, we are continuing to hold scheduled data team meetings where grade levels are meeting with the director of curriculum and assistant principals to look at benchmark data collected, notice trends, and plan for Tier 1 lessons and Tier 2 interventions. Friday was also the annual Academics Cup in third grade. third graders competed against third graders across the world, and that's really important because people think it's New Jersey. And one thing I hate about the Academics Cup is you don't know how many teams are competing. You just see the top 10 scoreboard. But I am proud to say that we had numerous third graders in the top 10 in the world. And this year we tried something new, and we allowed them to stay on site until 6 p.m. These little 8-year-olds were in this auditorium bleary-eyed, but they showed resilience like you've never seen. Their computers were running out of charge, and they were laying on the floor over here because they were not going to stop. So as I said, we did have 3 students come in the top 10 in correct in a row. We had 3 students come in the top 10 in most correct over the course of the day. And we did have one class, Miss Pisa's class, who placed in the top 10 as a class. Each of them will win some prizes. It's kind of funny. It's like a Domino's pizza party, but it feels like the biggest accomplishment ever because it is something they have built up for. And again, I always find this one student during our Academics Cup that isn't on the board. But that student has played and played and played, and they might not be the most mathematically able student, but that's the kid that shows persistent. And every year there's one that you just see because they know their score is helping their team. It's helping their class. And again, this year there was one also. I'd like to now move to tonight's agenda. You'll notice on the personnel agenda that you will be accepting the retirement of Missy Warnett as Secretary of Student Records. Ms. Warnett will retire on July 1st with just shy of 30 years of service to OPS. While we are sad to see her go, we know she has some wonderful adventures ahead, and she'll still be getting texts from me every time I have an issue with real time. Now, for the meat of today's presentation, I'd like to begin, as you requested, with a high-level overview of the district goals. In your folders, you will see a document that looks like this. And I'm just going to give you some highlights of that. Goal 1 this year was to meet the needs of all learners via a differentiated approach to learning, as evidenced by the number of students who meet or exceed expectations on the New Jersey Student Learning Assessment, with a target goal of ranking in the top third of comparable districts in mathematics and language arts. So if you look at that table, you will see the items that have been completed, the items that are still in progress, and the items that we haven't yet started. As I said before, I'm really happy and pleased and did hire with this focus to ensure that we were putting data team meetings together, that we weren't just collecting data, but we were actually looking at data to inform trends. And some of the work that's been done with that this year is really having teachers not just look at their class's data, but also look at their class's data in comparison to their peers' data. Is there an area where your peers might be doing better or not as well as you, and what can we learn from that? We also have implemented a math screener in grades K through 1. And the other highlight for me of this year has been our use of Intervention Manager, which, if the curriculum committee is interested, is something we can share with you more. Intervention Manager is an additional platform with Linkit that allows us to put multiple sets of data in and to really triangulate and look at which students really need Tier 3 interventions. So we're not making those subjective decisions, but we're truly using objective data. On the front burner right now is we are in the process of also developing a Tier 1 program that will be a before or after the school day program to target students in grades 3 through 6, which also was an item on the action plan. Goal 2 was to develop and adopt a set of standard operating procedures for all the key department functions of the district. And I will say that this is the goal that we have not made as much progress on, and that truly is, many things are in progress. Our website development and our implementation of the new app and the communication platform has really taken most of my time right now. But I have good news. The website is almost completely done. We had an alert training recently, and now we will move on, which is the communication platform, and now we will move on to the app. We are having a little bit of issue working with Apple right now. So hopefully Mr. Iapelli is on the charge there, and he told me he is going to figure this out, and we will get that app and website up and going. My goal is to launch it right prior to spring break. And the reason is that's a good time if there's any glitches. It's not a super high-pressure time, and the worst thing I felt we could do is launch a new app at the start of the school year when everyone's looking for something. So goal 3 is to improve communication between educators and families regarding academic and behavioral expectations and progress. And you will notice everything there from creating an INRS flowchart to guide teachers on when parent communication should occur and when to also speak to their assistant principals. You will notice on there reviewing report card comment expectations to ensure that teachers were not just saying, well, every parent loves to hear that Johnny's smile warms your heart when he walks into the classroom. We really need to make sure that the comments on report cards are geared towards student progress, especially the goals set at the goal-setting conference. And I really believe the true highlight in Goal 3 is the implementation of interim progress reports in 6th grade. So we started this year, and we really felt, since our 6th graders are more of a middle school model, that we wanted to start midterm informing parents if their child was not meeting academic expectations. So we started that by just drafting a Google Doc and having teachers send that home mid-marking period. And then that's not the most efficient method, but we didn't want to make anything more permanent until we knew we were on the right track. We then, from there, have now put those in real time. So we have actually put progress reports for kindergartners through 6th graders in real time. We are only currently implementing them with 6th grade with plans to start working downward. But the infrastructure is now there for us to do that, to ensure that if a student is struggling midterm, their parent has clear communication about that. And the final aspect on here that is something that's really become a talk at our administrative meetings, and that is the use of homework. How can homework be a communication tool between home and school? What can we add to our homework so it's not just homework for reinforcement purposes or homework for completion purposes, but how can homework be a tool of communication, of linking home and school? And our last goal is near and dear to my heart. It is to work with stakeholders to begin the process of creating a profile of an OPS graduate. As you know, we launched that survey this week. We already have 140 responses from parents, so I do hope, mostly current parents and staff. I really am hoping and trying to encourage former parents because I think they have a great insight into Oradell Public, and we do have some future parents that have completed it as well. Some of you don't know, but when I interviewed to be superintendent at Oradell Public, I spoke about a profile of a graduate, because I truly believe that this can be the district's North Star. It becomes our common vision of what we want for the children of OPS, and this North Star then becomes the jumping off point for our protocols. Where do we want to spend our money? What do we want to add to our curriculum? So instead of doing a piecemeal approach, if we have a solid profile of a graduate, every time we want to do something, we look back and say, how does this align with what we decided was what we want for all children when they leave 6th grade? And I will be honest, I look every single morning to see what the responses are, because I'm really excited to do the next step, which, as you see here, will be to look at the data collected and begin to see which words could go together. What's the graphic that we're going to use to represent this vision? And the one thing I want to be incredibly clear about profile of a graduate is it doesn't mean academics don't happen. There is one district that their profile is a pyramid, and I think this is a really smart way to think of it. The bottom level of their pyramid are academics. No one is saying a solid educational foundation is not our first priority, but what more do we want? So that concludes my report. Do you have any questions?
I have a question on the academics. Did all the 3rd graders, it wasn't required, obviously, because it was after school. How many?
Oh, all 5 3rd grade classes participated during the day, and all 5 classrooms teachers also stayed after school. It was up to a parent whether they wanted their child here, and there were children everywhere.
So Most stayed, did any?
Yes. They stayed to different times.
I
Some
guess
left
some
at
did not
4.
stay.
Some didn't stay, some stayed till 4. And there was a group that at 5:50, we were like, okay, it's time to pack up. We got to take your laptops upstairs.
Good. Any questions on the goals? Mrs. Walker?
Just, I think this is very comprehensive, thank you, and helpful in us as we look over each of the goals that we've had and where you've achieved them, so thank you for that.
Yeah, this is a lot of information, so obviously take it home, look at it, and if you have
Yes.
questions, bring it back for our next meeting. Okay, moving forward, we're going to move to Mr. Iapelli's report.
Good evening. I just wanted to bring your attention to D8. This is the resolution awarding the HVAC system upgrade. We had gone out to bid. This is the regular operating district grant, the ROD grant, so the state will be providing 40% of the costs. They will be funding that, so we'll get 40% in aid, and the balance comes out of our capital reserve. That's already been designated and assigned in this year's budget. I just wanted to highlight that because this will be a major project this summer. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Moving to minutes, review of January 22nd. Any questions or comments, please email Mr. Iapelli. We have approval of January 7th minutes. Do I have a motion?
I motion to approve.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Nutlin. Any questions? Call the question.
On the roll, Mr. Del Greco,
Yes.
Mr. Darian,
Abstain?
Mrs. Downey,
Yes.
Mrs. Moran,
Yes.
Mr. Nutlin,
Yes.
Mrs. Walker,
Abstain.
Mrs. Nichols.
Yes. Committee reports, buildings and grounds, Mr. Del Greco.
I'd like to introduce B1, use of school facilities, and I also would like to, either now or after this meeting, set a date for our next B&G meeting. Just some issues, I guess, some things we have to talk about.
Do I have a second on the motion first?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Walker. You want to meet after the meeting with your committee? Is everyone here? Who's not here? Oh, yeah, the whole committee's here. Yeah. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. B1, item number 3. Can we, if I think this is what I think it is, can we vote on that separately?
Yeah, we can vote on it. You would have to amend your motion to, we would make it B1.
1 and 2
And
and 4
then we'll make
through
it
7?
B2, which will be item number 3. So it's up to you if you want to amend your motion.
Yeah, I guess I can amend the
So
motion.
you can amend it to be B1 and B2, and B2 will be that number 3.
So for B2 would just be separate for item number 3 on that chart.
So do I have a motion? A second? A second?
Second.
Any questions? Call the question.
On the roll, Mr. Del Greco,
Yes.
Mr. Darian,
We're talking B1, right?
B1 and B2.
For B1, yes, B2, no.
It's for both. You understand that, Mr. Doug?
Yes.
We're voting, okay.
Thank you.
Wait. So we're talking about B1 and B2.
Yes,
Okay.
but you can vote separately.
Mrs. Downey,
B1, yes, B2, no.
Mrs. Moran,
B1, yes, B2, yes.
Mr. Nutlin,
B1, yes. B2, no.
Mrs. Walker,
B1, yes, and B2, yes.
Mrs. Nichols,
B1, yes, B2 abstain. Curriculum, Mrs. Noreen is not here. Mrs. Walker, would you like to take that?
Sure. Let's see, I'm not prepared. curriculum, I'd like to present C1.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Del Greco. Any questions?
On the roll, Mr. Del Greco.
Yes.
I didn't call it.
Mr. Darian.
I didn't call the roll call.
Yes.
Mrs. Downey?
Yes.
Mrs. Moran?
Yes.
Mr. Nutland?
Yes.
Mrs. Walker?
Yeah.
Mrs. Nichols?
Yes, Finance, Mr. Darian?
Yes, before I introduce these items, I just want to review what we've discussed at our subcommittee meetings. Our first meeting was January 29th, and our second subcommittee meeting was today, just before this meeting. So on the 29th, we kicked off our budgeting process, and we talked a lot about well, first we started with the dates. We created a calendar of dates that we were going to meet between now and May, which is when our public hearing will be. We discussed upcoming, these are Airedales, they're HVAC units. We have a bid that's going to be on this agenda tonight. We were reviewing what the bid results were at that time. We discussed some technology issues, and we talked about healthcare costs, our debt service, and what's commonly referred to as bank cap, which is just any amount above the standard 2% that we do annually. But those were just conceptual discussions because we usually talk about those at the end of the budget season. Tonight, we went a little further into the ROD grant. We talked a little bit about some other big ticket items, and we went into our first look at the largest cost items in the budget. So with that, on the agenda tonight, we have D1 through D8.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Walker. We'd like to thank the PTA for almost $5,000 to their programs listed under D7. Any questions? Mr. Nutland?
Yeah. What brand or program interactive boards were we looking at? I know Mimeo and Promethean, I think, are the two big ones.
We're using BenQ boards. We had one of our sixth grade teachers who utilized a Promethean board in her prior district. We got a Promethean board from them, and we tried it out in the sixth grade science class for 3 months, because they'll give you a board free for 3 months. I then asked her to, because I've been very interested in the BenQ products, I asked her to try the BenQ board for 3 months, thinking she was going to immediately tell me the Promethean board was better, because that's what she was used to. She immediately told us that the BenQ board was better. So it actually is also a little bit cheaper, and I'm really happy with the service we're getting. So we are installing 6 BenQ boards in probably the next month.
Okay. What was the price difference about?
I'll have Mr. Iapelli get back to you on that, because I'm not actually sure.
Cool.
Mrs. Walker?
Will there be training for those teachers, which is very important, I think, when changing?
Yeah, it's actually, well, they don't actually have interactive boards in third. These are going, one is going into 6th grade science, and the other 5 are going into 3rd grade. So they actually do not have interactive boards. So it won't be changed necessarily to a different product. It will be implementing a product, and they've actually asked for it. So one of the things that I was a little bit sold on BenQ, and specifically the vendor we're using, is when they showed it to us, they sent us a trainer and told us the levels of training they would be willing to provide us. So I'm confident, and we've also tasked a few staff members to become teacher leaders in this as well, because, the vendor's not here when you have a problem, and you need some people on site that can help you.
And I've noticed that with my student teachers, how they've improved using the boards, the smart boards, and whatever the manufacturer is. And the more they use them, the more familiar they become. So you really need to have teacher training to make use of these things, because they're wonderful.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the reasons I really like the BenQ boards is they have the capacity to, when we use a smart board in the classroom, the teacher presents onto the smart board, right? The BenQ boards have the ability for students to, through Chromecast on their Chromebooks, to present on the smart board. It also has, when you first saw smart boards, only 1 or 2 people could touch at one time. This can have 40 touches at the same time. So you can have multiple people working at the same time. It really has some great features. And so the training is super important, because otherwise you only use 2 of those features and you don't realize how much else you can do.
And they can also save their work so that they can use it again for another
Yeah.
session or lesson.
It's actually one of the cool things about BenQ boards. If we were a middle school with rotating classrooms, every user gets a scan card, and your scan card can go from room to room. And so your stuff, if you're the world language teacher and you're teaching in 4 rooms, can go with you. Which, again, like there's some really cool stuff right now with it. So I'm glad. I've been looking at BenQ for probably over a year now, and it wasn't one of the names we were hearing as much about. What I like about the company is Promethean is just boards, and Epson is just projectors. BenQ does it all. So I feel like they were a little more open to showing you all different possibilities.
I have 2 comments.
Mr. Darian?
I just wanted to state, D5, our correction and action plan, is a very minor thing that we had to do. This happens to be with the co-op. Even though the co-op was approved, we should have had a board approve anyway. But, so I just wanted to make a comment that while we have a corrective action plan, it was very minor. And then secondly, on D7, I know Mr. Ipelli had mentioned this, but I just wanted to, I'm sorry, D8. I'm referring to the HVAC upgrades on D8. I just wanted to reinforce that the funds for this, $725,000, is coming out of our capital reserve. So, this is, a multi-year trend now where we're spending between $700,000 and $900,000 each year for capital improvements, and these things are not being put off, and lumped together and then gone out to the community with a referendum to bail us out. So, this is just another example of, utilizing the capital reserve in the way it was designed. We also are getting, a 40% copay with the state, and currently within the subcommittee, we're also looking at other upgrades to our HVAC through a new program, which we may get up to 80% copay with the state. So, I just wanted to call that out publicly, so that's all I have.
Any other comments? Call the question.
On the roll, Mr. Del Greco.
Yes.
Mr. Darian.
Yes.
Mrs. Downey.
Yes.
Mrs. Moran.
Yes.
Mr. Nutlin.
Yes.
Mrs. Walker.
Yes.
Mrs. Nichols.
Yes. Personnel, Mrs. Walker?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to present F1, but beforehand, just a quick review of what we discussed last week at our personnel meeting. And basically, we had a lengthy discussion on the school calendar for next year, 25, 26. And that's still in the stages, because there was very much an animated discussion about certain days that we didn't like this year, or that we thought we maybe could revamp it. And thank you for those different recommendations that were sent to us on the different districts that surround us, and what they're doing on, say, Martin Luther King Day, or are they starting maybe earlier in the school year than September 1? And then also the OEA agreement, we are still in the process of negotiating with our administrators on different points of interest that they might have, and we will be continuing our discussion. And staff autonomy, apparently there is, we had some questions about what was going on with the Song Fest and Sing Along, was it? And we will be continuing to go over ways to make sure that everything runs very smoothly, because it is a lovely way to have the kids celebrate pre-holidays. And with that in mind, I'd like to present F1.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Del Greco with a second. Any questions or comments? Call the question.
On the roll, Mr. Del Greco.
Yes.
Mr. Darian.
Yes.
Mrs. Downey.
Yes.
Mrs. Moran.
Yes.
Mr. Nutland.
Yes.
Mrs. Walker.
Yes.
Mrs. Nichols.
Yes. Policy, Mr. Nutland.
Hi. Looking to plan a meeting for next week. I'll be emailing my colleagues. I present G1.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Walker. Any questions? Call the question.
On the roll, Mr. Del Greco.
Yes.
Mr. Darian.
Yes.
Mrs. Downey.
Yes.
Mrs. Moran.
Yes.
Mr. Nutland.
Yes.
Mrs. Walker.
Yes.
Mrs. Nichols.
Yes. Public relations, Mrs. Downey.
So we had a meeting and we discussed the profile of a graduate survey and the website layout.
Website's looking good. At this time, we'll open to the public. You can just state your name for the record.
Sure, my name is Katerina Saviano.
And my name is Vanessa Vega Gonzalez.
And if you could just write it in the book so we have it.
Sure. Okay. I'm going to read off a text message, excuse me. As concerned parents, we want to ensure that there is a clear and effective crisis management protocol in place to protect our students as well as teachers. It's important to make sure that that crisis management protocol aligns with the existing bullying framework and is made public so that students and parents understand that these kinds of issues are taken seriously and are dealt with using a structured approach. While the school may have a protocol in place, it's unclear to parents and students what are the reporting protocols for a child to self-report. We are unclear about the response actions from an investigative lens. We also are curious about what type of support plans are in for children and teachers impacted, as well as any sort of measures from a disciplinary action point of view. And then further to that, a communication plan during incident and post. So it is our recommendation to see if there is an opportunity to implement a framework as such.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Hi, Jen Allen, 954 Wildwood Road. I was really glad to read about and then receive the portrait of the OPS graduate survey. I strongly believe that involving all stakeholders is essential to building trust and collaboration. I was a bit disappointed to open the survey and simply see a list of traits asking us to identify 5 that we believe are the most important, or asking if we had any others in mind. I had hoped that this process was going to be more of a deep dive into strategic planning that involved all stakeholders, similar to what many other districts, including Riverdale and River Edge, just were a part of. River Edge just released their 5-year plan that came from several community meetings that their town engaged in. I'm hopeful that there is a plan to engage in that level of deep and end-in-mind backwards planning, and that the decision to have parents in the community vote on a list of traits wasn't to make it look as though there was some input from stakeholders in a surface way, because I would find that a bit insulting. At the end of August, just before the school year began, I participated in one of the parent focus groups that was offered to discuss key topics and gather feedback about how OPS could continue to improve the school community with Coach Jim Stroker and Principal Hawley. I appreciated very much being given this opportunity. I had hoped that this too was a launching point for more strategic planning, more transparency, and more involvement from multiple stakeholders in key decisions, something that I think is very needed here, especially because we are a one-school school district. Unfortunately, there hasn't been much further that has been shared after that opportunity. During this opportunity, I shared something that I believe is relevant to the Portrait of the Graduate initiative and necessary prior to identifying the portrait of an OPS graduate or our hopes for the OPS graduate, your North Star. At every board meeting, you begin with a mission statement. The Oradell Public School is dedicated to the ongoing pursuit of educational excellence through comprehensive, innovative curriculum and instruction. I don't need to recite it to you. You all have it. You read it each time you're here. This is from 2019. Well, adopted from 2019, so I would assume it's from the product of a process the board, and I would hope multiple stakeholders engaged in the year or so prior. If that was a process, I don't know what the process was. If that's the case, how many members of this board were involved in that mission? While I know her school has multiple siblings, the kids that began in 2018-19 are currently 6th graders on their way out. I know this isn't the same staff. I know this isn't the same leadership team from 2018-19 either. So much has happened since 2018-19. We've experienced a global pandemic which impacted education greatly and taught us all a great deal. We have quite a bit of educational research since 2018-19 that our district needs to be responsive to and our kids deserve to benefit from. In addition to the mission not being reflective of the current stakeholders, I don't really know what this mission means to teaching and learning at OPS, and I can't find a vision. A mission is why you exist. A vision is how you accomplish those goals. As an educator and parent, I believe that a vision and mission should remain in drafts, or at least being reviewed and revised yearly, as it's what should be driving all decisions in a school, from goals to budget alignment, program decisions, to curriculum, to assessment, all the way down to day-to-day teacher planning, daily structures and routines, and a school-wide homework policy and philosophy, which I'm glad to hear you raise tonight. The vision and mission are what should be driving decisions that ensure there are consistent practices within a grade level and coherent practices across the grades. While your portrait of a graduate can serve you in some of these ways, a vision and mission, most importantly, should provide all of us with a clear understanding of how OPS believes students learn best. I've been a parent here for 3 years now and a community member in Oradell for 8 years. I attended board meetings when I was pregnant with my now 8-year-old with former superintendents. Despite my involvement, and I'm usually here solo, so you know I am involved, and my attendance here, I don't know how you believe students learn best. I do know that my children have had amazing teachers in this school that I highly respect. They've had past amazing teachers. They have current amazing teachers. Every time I'm at this podium, I say this is not a teacher level issue, but it impacts teachers and it impacts my kids, so I do care very deeply. Are we a school that believes students learn best when they have direct, explicit instruction? Or are we a school that believes in inquiry first and a more problem-solving approach? Does it depend on the subject matter? Are we a school that believes children should work flexibly in groups and partnerships and therefore small group work is the majority of my kids' day? I don't know that. Are we a school that believes everything we do needs to support students' executive functioning skills and development, and therefore every lesson at OPS begins with what we're doing and why and ends with a reflection, and along the way the teachers talk about their planning and time management for kids? Are we a school that believes children need think time and to discuss first, and therefore before they go to independent practice, they articulate their plan to a partner? Are we a school that believes in repetition and practice and that they're essential even in homework. So with that in mind, we highlight games versus color all the thes red or cut and paste numbers. I don't know how OPS believes students learn best, and I believe I should. I don't believe we should be creating a portrait of a graduate without engaging in a much deeper analysis and really identifying the vision and mission of OPS. I believe in real community engagement, and I hope this board does as well.
Thank you.
Kristen Genchi. I want to speak directly about the author publication. Most of you don't know me. I have a first grader and an incoming kindergartner if I ever finish his registration paperwork. My husband and I moved to Oradell in November of 2022 after 6 years in a very rural and southern Maryland community, but we were both born and raised in northern New Jersey. I'm from Hasbrook Heights originally. Oradell is a community I have come to love and love living in, though I sometimes struggle with the perception of privilege and making sure my children know that this isn't typical. Everyone in this room is different from the other in many or most ways, but two things are true of all of us. We're parents and we love our children. That's something I think that we all truly have in common. We all also have the right to teach our children what our own beliefs are and to raise them in the manner that we want. Whether it's the popular vote or not, everyone is entitled to their opinions, and I'm not here to change what anybody thinks, feels, or what they choose to teach their children. As parents, our voices are very loud. They are the ones our children should be listening to. What we need to remember is that our voices are not just loud at home, but they're loud to all of the kids in our community. We're coaches, we're troop leaders, we're parents to our kids' friends. We're class parents. We hand out pizza on Wednesdays to like really happy little kids who just want pizza. For the bulk of us in here, our children are young and they don't really know themselves yet. Do we really want their foundation to be one of thinking that they don't belong in our school and in our community? There's a lot of talk about banning books, and I think that really shines a light, this book in particular that people are speaking about, it shines a light on the children of the LGBTQIA community, and the message we're sending these kids is that they don't deserve to be part of our community. Whether you realize it or not, whether that's what your intention is or not, it's what the message is to them. They will grow up thinking that something is wrong with them when there's not. Their existence is as important as yours, mine, and everyone not in the LGBTQIA community. If this is something you don't believe in, don't sign your child up for this. But please don't teach children that these other kids in this large community are less than us or anybody else. Banning a book puts us on a horribly slippery slope. This is where it begins, but where does it end? We're living in very tumultuous times, regardless of where you stand, and the world can be a very scary place. Before I sit back down, I just want to share a story. I said before that my husband and I lived in southern Maryland for 6 years. We were in a really beautiful town on a very narrow strip between the Chesapeake Bay and the Patuxent River. There, to get to us, you had to go over a bridge called the Solomon's Island Bridge. The views were absolutely stunning, and the sunsets were like no sunsets I've ever seen. Our neighbor's son's best friend, a senior in the high school my own children would have attended had we not moved back home, his name was Andrew Suckram, and he jumped off of that bridge on October 28th, 2021. He was gay, and he was ostracized by the community very much. To my knowledge, they still have not recovered his body, and his parents are obviously suffering, as are the people who loved him. Again, this is not about me changing anybody's philosophical views, but it all starts here and now, and we're laying the groundwork for our children. I think keeping out an entire population of people is not what we want in the profile of an OPS graduate. I think inclusivity is really important, and whether we believe in it, understand it, get it, or not, we shouldn't be excluding people, and we should be teaching our children to just be inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Ms. Bozes, do you want to speak on profile of a graduate at all?
Sure. First of all, thank you for your feedback because it was incredibly eloquently stated, and I mirror every single thing you said. You have two different ways to go when you do strategic planning. This board did do strategic planning, and I was looking around and I was thinking that there's probably 4 members of this board that were there. And it was open to parents. It was over 4 nights. It was probably in the spring of 2018. And it was an abysmal failure, frankly, because no one showed up. And that's part of the problem. So that's why I think that that specific strategic plan never really gravitated. The last day of that strategic plan was creating that mission statement. The reason I chose to, and superintendents have 2 different ways to go. Some do strategic plan first. I'm actually mirroring Riverdell. Riverdell did profile of a graduate last year and are now doing their strategic plan based on the profile they created this year. One area that I chose to do a little differently is their profile was completed in a room with 1 representative from each stakeholder group. So there were 2 parents, 2 students. I was there as the Oradell Public School Superintendent. I wanted to provide the larger community. So my intention was never to feel that picking 5 words was trite. That was a starting point. And we will continue to have stakeholders involved in the process. And I do hope that this will launch us into a strategic plan that is anchored in something. And I would like it anchored in the North Star that we create. Because I do want, very much so, that every single person that comes through here knows what OPS stands for. That if I see somebody on the street, I want to be able to say, what's OPS known for? And I want it to be more than sharp. I want it to be that it's a community that believes in this type of learning, just like you. So I ask that you give me a little bit of patience right now as we work through this process, and I do promise you that there will be more stakeholder involvement. I just ask that those of you sitting here today and those who might be watching the video show up, because otherwise it's flat. And I love that you love your teachers, but they get nervous about sitting in a room and doing stakeholder work with you. So I ask that you show up and you be open-minded and we be flexible and we use this as a launching pad to create something really great for our community, because no matter how different we view different things, we all want the same thing: what's best for the children of Oradell.
Moving on to old or new business. Anybody have any? Mrs. Walker?
I just noticed in one of our superintendent's weekly reports, she talked something about the enrollment in the school presently is 815 students, maybe lost 1 or 2 or gained 1 or 2 in the last 2 weeks. Why has it increased so much in the past couple of years? Do you have?
So a lot of that has to do with COVID. We saw a lot of people leaving more dense populated areas for some green space. And so our enrollment the year right after COVID did go up 40. So we had a net difference of 40 that year. So that was a start. And then we had an anomaly last year. The districts around us landed up cutting a kindergarten section while we were adding a kindergarten section. So maybe Oradell has a really great reputation right now. Maybe that's where the house market was. What I also shared in that newsletter is what we're seeing is actually not mirroring New Jersey. No. New Jersey birth trends continue to go down, but it hasn't impacted us. Now, based on our current kindergarten registration and those that are almost registered, we're probably looking at a decrease. But we've had some people move in, and I use our current sixth grade as a perfect example. When they started in kindergarten, they had 111 students. They gained 24 net change between kindergarten and sixth grade to have 135 sixth graders, including 9 students that moved in between fifth and sixth grade. People are just flocking to Oradell, and we're just going to keep making it better, so they'll just keep moving in.
Thank you.
Any other old or new business? Excuse me? So technically it's closed, but I'll allow it. Come to the mic.
We were just confused about the vote that happened because it seemed like to us, because it's hard to hear back
Right.
there, that there were 3 yeses and 3 nos and then 1 abstain, so we thought it was tied. So if it's tied, then
So if
shouldn't
it-
somebody vote? We didn't know if the motion passed or not.
If it's tied, motion fails.
Okay.
I can't get into the subject, but I will
No,
tell you that
that's what we wanted to know.
the board is going to be getting more information on the PTA author visits.
Thank you.
Any other old or new business? Okay, we do need to go into a closed session. I need someone to make a motion for a closed session for student issues, safety, security issues, and a special ed legal issue. If anybody wants to make that motion.
I'll make the motion.
Motion by Mr. Del Greco. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Walker. Roll call.
On the roll, Mr. Del Greco.
Yes.
Mr. Darian.
Yes.
Mrs. Downey. Mrs. Moran.
Yes.
Mr. Nutlin.
Yes.
Mrs. Walker.
Yes.
Mrs. Nichols.
Yes, we'll be going to closed session. We will not be taking action after, so meeting is over.